Hey everyone, it's David Chen. I'm here today to talk about Thor Love and Thunder, which is hitting theaters this weekend. Joining me for this chat, he is the host of the Streaming Things podcast about Stranger Things. He's also on TikTok at Movies Are Therapy. Chris Rudd, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me, Dave. This is wonderful.
You just watched Thor Love and Thunder. You just came home from the theater. I watched it a couple weeks ago. And I guess I wanted to ask you your overall thoughts on this movie.
So I liked it. I think more than most people because I was going in a little worried because I got the advanced reviews and it was saying not so great. A little too much Taika, I think, was the consensus. Maybe a little too jokey. And I was thinking to myself, how could you have too much Taika? Because that's my aesthetic. I love his stuff ever since What We Do with in the Shadows. I think it's goofy and fun. Thor Ragnarok is probably my favorite MCU entry. So maybe I had expectations too high, but I was like, how could he mess it up this bad? And I think the first act is clumsy and has a lot to be criticized, but the third act is so strong and everybody was having a good time. All the jokes seemed to land in my theater, and it was a packed Dolby showing. So overall, I think it's a win. It's certainly no Thor Ragnarok. And maybe that's just what it is. People's expectations were just so high, and it's just an above middling entry itself. And that's not a big deal, except that everybody wanted this to be amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved it. Yeah.
I would say it's a real mixed bag, Chris, for me. It is mixed at best, verging on bad, I would say. I love a lot of what Taika Waititi has done. Love What We Do in the Shadows. Love Jojo Rabbit. Love Thor Ragnarok, right? Like, I think, and also Our Flag Means Death on HBO Max. Just finished that. Brilliant show.
Love it.
So I was fully expecting to enjoy this movie, Thor Love and Thunder, as well. And I really didn't that much. I mean, there's a couple of decent things about it. There's a handful of like great shots and great moments. But overall, I found that its mix of tones, of tragedy and lighthearted humor, like it didn't mix well. It didn't gel well for me. And sadly, I also just felt like a lot of the movie looked really bad. A lot of it was shot on using the same technology that they used for like The Mandalorian, where they shot on the volume.
The volume, yeah.
And that is a style of filmmaking that can look amazing if done correctly, but it can also look very cheap if it's not used correctly. And unfortunately, a lot of the shots looked really cheap and kind of unpleasant. I saw this movie in IMAX, and the IMAX I feel like didn't make it feel more grand or impressive to me. It actually just accentuated the flaws of the appearance. Everything looked very fake and cartoony, but not in a way that felt stylish or intentional to me.
Intended, yeah.
Yeah, and so I wasn't a huge fan of both the movie in terms of the plot, the story, the tones, and how it looked and felt. So for this movie, this movie was a miss for me, unfortunately. But let's dive into some of the more specific aspects of the movie. So assume from this point forward, we're going to be talking about spoilers for Thor: Love and Thunder. If you haven't seen the movie, bookmark this video, come back later. Let's talk about, I would say, the main plot of the story, which is, and let's just say that a lot of the stuff in the trailers doesn't even hint at some of the biggest aspects of the plot of this film, right? And that is that Natalie Portman's character, Dr. Foster, has cancer, and she's dying of cancer, and she finds Mjolnir to try to counteract the effect that cancer has on her body. That's like a very dark, sad storyline that has a lot of potential for really interesting drama, especially because it never felt like Natalie Portman had ever found her place in the MCU, and this was kind of like maybe a chance for her to do so. What did you think of Natalie Portman in Thor: Love and Thunder, and what did you think of that storyline specifically?
I love the idea of the storyline. And even though I don't read the comics, I knew about it from like TikTok or something. I think it was a Jay Stoops video months ago where they talked about, hey, this is probably how she got the Thor powers in the
Mm-hmm.
comics. She has cancer and she used, blah, blah, blah. So I wasn't surprised about all that at all. And I love the idea of it. I don't think I loved her performance in this movie, which is weird because I'm a huge Natalie Portman stan. There was nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't, it wasn't Natalie Portman, standards. But maybe there wasn't
Well,
much to do with it.
it's more like Natalie Portman is rarely in comedic roles, or at
Right.
least most of the movies I remember Natalie Portman from are not comedic roles.
Right.
Leon the Professional and Black Swan, and more serious, and even prequel trilogy. Like those are not comedic roles, and
Not
so
intentionally.
exactly. And I felt like a lot. It just takes a lot of skill and a lot of flexibility
It's its own
to come up.
thing.
It's its own thing. I think Chris Hemsworth has pulled it off really well. Like he went from Thor being a mostly dramatic figure with some comedic moments to kind of like a fully comedic character in Thor
Mhm.
Ragnarok, and I thought it totally worked. And so they tried to kind of do the same thing with her character in this movie, Natalie Portman's character, and I don't think it quite took.
Well, I think it was Kenneth Branagh that started the franchise, right?
Yeah, with
A-
Thor, the first one. Yeah.
And he's got that, Shakespearean, self-serious
Yes.
tone. And I think people kind of mocked that. And so what Taika did, or maybe even unintentionally, it just worked, was no, this is funny. Let's do himbo with this character, and
Right.
it worked so well for me. And I think most people, and maybe this movie was him being given too much reign with that, like because it works so well. They're like, just do it all the way, I guess. But I don't agree necessarily because I've seen that criticism a lot that there was some really serious things in this movie that were undercut by the humor. And I guess they mean the cancer, right? Is that like the main thrust of this?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that it's interesting, right? Because I think it's possible to deal with cancer in a humorous way. Like,
Right.
I don't
That's what I
think
was getting
anything is
to.
off limits, right?
Hmm.
Like, most things are not off limits. Or yeah, like
Yeah.
most things are fair game, is what I mean to say, right? And I think that if you want to do like a comedic take on a cancer storyline, like that is well within your rights. But for me, the problem was it felt like let's take this really dark um storyline that's like potentially upsetting and then like try to throw in some jokes as opposed to uh as opposed to like the story being conceived in a way that kind of effortlessly blended these ideas together of like these are a wisecracking group of heroes that are also contending with cancer. Do you know what I mean? Like it felt more like we're just trying to shove jokes in here as opposed to um, a cohesive whole. But what do you think?
No, I get that, and I don't know that I'm the best person to speak on it because I don't have this like deep emotional tie to the source material like a lot of people do. But my guess would be that Taika respects it, but doesn't see it as a serious story necessarily because it's ultimately space Vikings fighting shadow monsters across the cosmos, right? He's probably like, this is ridiculous. This is fun. Let's party. Um, and even if he did think it was serious, I mean, look at Jojo Rabbit. Would he really bring too much levity to something like that without all the jokes? I don't know that he's capable of that, and I don't know that I would want him to. Um, but I didn't think it mishandled it necessarily. They just there was too much Korg, and I love Korg, but my mother passed from cancer, and from my experience, it's humor is vital throughout the all of those processes. You know what I mean? And so, and ultimately, it's not even a sad story because though she dies, she ends up in the Norse version of heaven to live out eternity, happy and free, right? So it's not even really like it's sad. Um, I guess is what my thought with like everybody has a happy ending in this movie,
Mm-hmm.
even
Mm-hmm.
the villain, which I actually loved.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's less. Hey, they tried to make a cancer story funny, and it's more that there's just so much stuff in this movie that it feels like this unwieldy collection of all these tones. So you have this cancer storyline, then you have this kind of love story. They need to deal with the Thor Dr. Foster storyline. Like
Hmm.
what happened? There's a lot of like, he spent a lot of time crying and depressed from the Thor character spent a lot of time crying and depressed in the last few times we've seen him uh because this relationship ended, and so they need to like deal with like how they get together and if they get together and what how that all plays out. um you're introducing an entirely new villain played by Christian Bale. You need to give that villain a backstory and a lot of interesting stuff to do. And then you have cameos from people like Russell Crowe in this movie, who is doing a ridiculous over the top accent. And you mix all this together, and it should be like, oh, that sounds delicious to like throw all these things in there. But
Hmm. It's a lot.
it's a lot. That's what I'm saying. It's a lot,
There's
and
like
I don't think
fruit
the
in the
call
beef
quite
stew.
works in the end.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I just think I don't know. I think everybody's right. Like the Russell Crowe stuff didn't work for me at all. That whole scene seemed way too long. And then, even though I was laughing, I was like, I should be a lot more into this than I am. I'm a huge fan of Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought that Christian Bale was phenomenal, which is no less than anyone expects typically when he enters the scene. All the villain stuff was great.
Well, he's
Um,
basically he looks like his character from The Machinist, basically. I mean,
yeah.
and that's the thing is when the movie opens, it opens with Christian Bale in the desert with his daughter dying,
Hmm.
and I was like, wow, what a bold way of opening this. And it, I would not say that set the tone for the rest of the film. That's the thing is like
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, they're really taking this to the next level in terms of like how dark it can be, right? Because this guy, um, his daughter dies, and then he finds his god doesn't exist, and then he kills his god. And yes, the stuff with the god and laughing at him, that's
Yeah. The
kind of
God was
funny, I guess.
goofy.
But like,
It wasn't.
overall, it's very like dark and upsetting. And so I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, cool. Like they're really going for it in this one. And then it's like very clear from the first act that nope, they're just trying to like keep it light, um, keep it jokey and quippy. And then, by the way, there's a love story, and also we're kidnapping all the children and taking them to the dark place. It's like okay, like I just, um, it, it felt like they tried to apply the Thor Ragnarok formula of we're quipping and we're snappy with our dialogue, but to a totally different story for which it doesn't work. Do you know?
Yeah. No, I get that. And again, I think uh, that the first act is where most of the most egregious things like that take place. Like it's so strange. I think the toughest parts about this movie are the hand wavy nature with which it has to try to connect to previous Thor films. And they
Mm-hmm.
use this Korg voiceover to try to amuse you while they stitch these films together that don't really belong together because we've had huge tentpole MCU movies
Right.
between that have taken him light years away from that character even. Like Thor's not even that Thor anymore. And
Right.
I, for
And
one,
the idea of that voiceover is to kind of fill in stuff that happened in Thor's storyline that we didn't see before, right?
right.
But it happened in the past. So
Yeah.
yeah. So there's
And
a
that's
lot
what I
of
mean. They're
like
just like, da
a
da da
lot of kind of
da.
retconning basically going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're watching like, that's not what happened. Um, and so, yeah, that was tough. But at the same time, once we get into what the story that this movie's trying to tell, it's really interesting and I think works really well. It just unfortunately takes over half the movie to get to that point, and the movie's not super long, at least by MCU standards.
Yeah, it's like one of the shortest MCU movies. I think it's like under 2 hours
Hmm.
or something like that. But let's talk about the stuff that really did work for you. It sounds like the second half of the movie worked for you a little bit better. Maybe the final act worked a little bit better. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I loved Christian Bale's performance and the whole idea of Gore the God Butcher. I thought all the best villains. Everybody says it all the time because it's true. When they have a believable motivation that you can almost identify with, that's the most compelling. And I think for me, at no point was I like until he took the kids, right? But even that, he's like seemed to be not interested in hurting them. It's just like I don't know that Gore should be stopped because every god that we talk to is objectively terrible.
They're all kind of assholes. So it's
Yeah,
like, Good on you. You're kind of rooting for Gore a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, after they went to Omnipotent City, I was like, okay, I don't know that he's wrong. Is like
Burn
anyone
the
other
whole
than
thing to the
Thor?
ground,
Yeah,
perhaps.
is anyone other than Thor have godlike status and remotely a benevolent being? I'm not sure. Um, so there's that, but also the whole twist at the end, like the way it all wrapped up. I did not expect for him to bring his daughter back and for that to become the ward of Thor. And it all seemed goofy, but you think Love and Thunder is Jane and Thor, and it turns out Love and Thunder is this daughter that we didn't know about, and Thor. And I love the twist of that, because for me, it's really interesting. I know we're supposed to be thinking about things that did work. I've never been that interested in the romance between Thor and Jane. Have you? Have you been invested in that
Not particularly.
at any point? Right. So I was just like, okay, I like that she's got a hammer, like that's what I came to see, not them
Yeah.
reunite in a romantic way.
And I thought all that hammer stuff, hammer versus axe stuff, really worked for me. Like that was very funny in the movie.
That was so funny. The whole idea of his, ex weapon making
Yes.
his new weapon jealous. That's the Taika White. Like that's
Yeah.
absurd.
It's very
And
good. It's very
and
good.
the two goats, they gotta laugh every single time. And I love the type of comedy. Jeff and I could talk about it better, but there's a type of comedy where something is funny, kind of, and then it's really annoying, and then if you persist, it's hilarious, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what the goats were to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, they're still doing the goats, and then I was crying laughing, at the 18th goat appearance.
I never got there. It started annoying and kind of
It's
stayed that way for
it
me.
stayed
But
in the annoying.
that's me with the
That's
goats.
fair. That's fair.
Um, but yeah, talking about the ending, I think that fundamentally the arc does work for me, right? Which is that at the end of the day, it's all about who you love. Love is more important, and I think like the movie did land that message. That's what ultimately motivates Christian Bale to not destroy the universe. Is he brings his daughter back, and it's a neat arc that jives with everything else from the Thor storyline for this movie, right? It felt a little bit unearned just because the road to that place was a little bit rocky, but
Yes.
overall, I think the ending did like the visuals of them on that pool of water and Christian Bale meeting the big god thingy. I forgot what its name is, and
Eternity.
Eternity, right? And then like Thor holding Jane in his arm. Like I think like the ending really did work for me, but everything else I thought was pretty rough leading up to that point.
I get that. Again, I really think it's that first when you watch it again, that first half is just so rough, and it's like the Guardians of the Galaxy are there, and I don't know
Yeah.
why. And I've seen a lot of criticism that it seems like a bunch of deleted scenes pasted together, and I think that's harsh, but also fair. But once it gets going, and you get into the whole Guns N' Roses dynamic mindset of it, and then again, it's not that long, so it's not like it's miserable or anything. It's certainly no Thor Ragnarok, but it's definitely not Dark World either. Is what I would say.
Yeah. I guess that's true. I mean, I think there's a couple of I would bring up a couple of related things to this, right? One is that you're right, it's not as bad as Thor the Dark World, which I think is the worst Thor movie and one of possibly the worst MCU film, other than maybe
Hmm.
The Incredible Hulk.
Yeah,
But in some ways, this almost feels more offensive to me, because it's not as bad. But it almost feel like I know so much work goes into making a movie, but it almost feels like not that much effort went into like the story, building the story to be something that would be compelling, but also b making all these disparate elements cohere together. It just felt like they just threw it, like you said, they threw in, oh, Guardians of the Galaxy, put that in there, um, and I thought the musical choices were. I've read Taika Waititi talk about them and how he loved Guns N' Roses, but like it felt lazy to me. Like it
hmm
felt like these are the most obvious Guns N' Roses tracks that we've heard like a million times before.
And the placement didn't always work. There was
Yeah.
the it was the entrance of Valkyrie's character, Tessa Thompson's character, I think. There was a like this huge Guns N' Roses needle drop that went on over her dialogue. She was just doing a Old Spice commercial, but still, it felt off
Yeah,
a little
it
bit.
didn't feel like particularly thoughtful. Which tracks were used, when they were used,
Hmm.
and so it just again, I know every movie is a massive effort, but it just felt like there was not that much effort put into this one. And part of that, I think, is also that the MCU is still figuring out its way through Phase 4, right? Like in
Yes.
phases 1 through 3, we kind of like understood this was all like leading to Thanos and the Infinity
Hmm.
Stones and this massive team up. And in Phase 4, I think it's kind of flailing right now. Like I think it's just kind of like, what is the animating principle behind it? Where is this all building towards? I don't think they've done a very good job of conveying the answer in a good way.
No,
And
I'm
so
really
that's
confused.
part of it, is like it doesn't feel as urgent. Like from a meta standpoint, this movie doesn't feel as urgent. And so then the question is, well, then the movie itself needs to be really good to demand your attention. And is it? I don't know that this one was. But yeah, what do you think about that, this Phase 4 aspect of a movie like Thor: Love and Thunder?
I agree with you. I think it's flailing completely. Again, I don't have like a concrete knowledge of the comic books or any stories that they could be pulling from. I've seen every MCU film and I've watched all the stingers. I think the one from I don't want to spoil it here, but there's a stinger in Eternals that is the only one I can think of that implies some sort of overarching villain or plot to come at all. Um, but I have no idea what that means or what it could be at all. So, and I think that where it's getting muddy is the Disney Plus shows. They're kind of trying to skip around between these different media now. And I don't know that it's working trying to tie it all together. It's just getting too massive. Like the snowball is starting to fall apart as it rolls down the hill, I think. And it's kind of just like pick a snow plot and find what you like at this point,
Right.
instead of it all like heading somewhere. It's very messy. It's very messy. And I understand what you mean. I like what you said. I think it's kind of relating back to having such high expectations, but yeah, it's great that a movie was made, but this movie in particular, it seems like with the people involved could have been something really, really, really special. And that's how I
Yes,
felt.
exactly. That's really what That's really, you have Russell Crowe, Academy Award winner Russell Crowe, Academy Award winner Christian Bale in this movie.
Hmm.
Taika Waititi, who is one of our great comedic minds. Uh, you know, a really huge budget, as many of these MCU movies have huge
Hmm.
budgets, and so it's like it feels like the combination of those things should be really compelling, really interesting, and it's not, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I feel like we got sold this dynamic of the, Valkyrie and uh, Jane as the mighty Thor, you know, I don't know if it's feminist, but some sort of female awesomeness level that I don't think I got that in the way that I wanted. Like she got hurt pretty early on in the at the climax, I think, of the second act, and then was kind of, I'm wounded. I better stay here. You take the lightning bolt. And I was like, no, 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 no. She doesn't get to be out of the story yet. That's not what I came here for. There was a couple things like that, but
Valkyrie gets wounded, right? Is that what you're saying? Or
yes,
yeah,
yes. And then, well, Jane has cancer, so she's pretty wounded too. So
but
it's all on Thor's shoulders again.
death has no, like, death or injury has no meaning in this world. In the post credit scene, we see that Zeus is still alive, so it's like, well, what was the point of that? Like, it felt like you might have killed Zeus there, but nope, he's
Yeah,
not dead. So it's
I thought
like,
that was
okay,
bold, and then no,
yeah, that's the thing. Every time this,
they did steal his thunder, though.
exactly. I mean, that's the thing, is the movie takes steps in like interesting directions, like, oh, killing Zeus. Wow, that's actually kind of shocking. Nope, he's not dead.
Hmm.
Opening the movie with this incredibly dark, sort of operatic tone. Nope, that's gone. Next scene. It's just like whenever the movie threatens to do something interesting, it just walks it back. And I think that's ultimately disappointing. But hey, I'm raining on your parade. Is there anything else you want to say about this movie? Because I think you had one of the more positive impressions about it.
No, I mean, like I said, it's one of those things. I think everybody's criticism is valid. It's not that I disagree. It's just I was laughing a little harder than most people.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the sentiment of it. I love Taika. we talk about separating art from the artist all the time, but and I talked about this with someone else recently as far as the Daniels go, but it's just like every now and then I like a creator so much, or they seem, I don't know them, they could be terrible, but they seem like such good people that I like their work more. And that's how I feel about everybody involved with this movie. I think the sentiment landed well. I like that we had, uh, Korg's not even human, but seemingly a gay character getting to, have a romance at the end of that, sit on the lava and make a baby together. And with Dwayne, I think it was, little stuff like this in a giant Disney movie, that I really appreciate. So I want to root for it harder. Um, but ultimately, like, everybody's criticism is valid. I had a really good time. I'm looking forward to watching it again because Thor Ragnarok didn't become my favorite MCU movie until like the third or fourth watch, where I was like, you know what? I think this is the best one. This is hilarious. This is awesome. Whereas the first time I watched it, I was like, that was fun. That was crazy.
Yeah. I have positive feelings about Taika Waititi as well. I'm not like against. I'm a huge fan of a lot of what he's done. I just feel like here's my feeling watching this movie and seeing the reaction to it. Right? Is I think because Taika has cultivated like a really great persona that a lot of people want to root for. People are being really charitable to this movie. And I don't necessarily have an issue with that. Like, we all have people we root for and want to succeed. And so it's like, I have people that I'm going to look more charitably upon their movies, even if it's not the greatest movie. I'm like, I like this person. I want them to succeed. I'm going to be more charitable to it. But
charitable is a good word.
Yeah. But when I look at this movie, it just feels like the most disposable kind of entertainment. Like, there's no. I would not recommend this movie to anyone. Like, my wife keeps asking me, like, should I go see this movie? Because she missed coming to the screening with me. I'm like, no, like, just wait for it to be on Disney Plus. And even then, if you never saw it, like, your life would not be different at all.
Sure.
And I think that's sad, and I feel like we should ask for better. Like, I feel like we should want entertainment. Like, time is our most precious resource here on Earth, and like, and something should be like good or great if it's something that we're going to spend our time with. And I just don't think Thor: Love and Thunder rose to that level. I'll just say one other thing about it too, which is watching the movie or the movie title and the marketing, Thor: Love and Thunder. I kind of got like evocations of 80s movies, like, Masters of the Universe or Heavy Metal, or, all those big colorful 80s movies.
Yeah.
And I just don't know that I felt like this movie lived up to that tonally and aesthetically.
No, I don't think it kept the promise of the marketing.
Yeah.
At all. I would agree 100% with that. Other than like his outfit that he has briefly in the beginning when he's with the Guardians.
Some of the tracks, and it's just like, so for me, this is like a pretty big misfire. It's, again, there are worse movies out there, but I think the fact that it's just so blah, again, makes it like, at least with Thor: The Dark World, I feel something, which is anger that the movie's so bad.
Sure, but you were like dead inside leaving.
Right, but this one, I'm just like, I just let it wash over me like so much fluff, and that's why I feel like even less charitable towards it than I do like actively bad films. But anyway, your mileage will vary. I'm curious what you all think about this movie. Feel free to leave some thoughts in the comments, respectfully, as usual. I want to give a big shout out and thanks to all of my patrons at patreon.com/Dave Chen for making my work possible. Feel free to sign up there for bonus audio and content. And I want to say thank you again to Chris Rudd. Check out his podcast, Streaming Things, about Stranger Things on Netflix. And also check out his presence on TikTok at Movies Are Therapy. Chris Rudd, thanks so much for joining me today.
Dave, thank you so much. It was an honor.